welcome back to the podcast. I'm here with Sky Jatani.
Hi, Phil.
Hi, Sky. And Christian Taylor. No. This is, who are you?
I don't know.
Siri just let him here.
Siri directed. This is John Walton, our buddy. He's a friend of the show. He's been on the show at least twice before. At least. So that qualifies him as an official friend of the show. He's sitting in the third chair, and he's also the guest for the day, so we will get to that shortly. But first, I have to sing the theme song. And I got a request from Jonathan Lopez. Do you know what Jonathan Lopez requested?
No.
Any guesses?
Is it a celebrity character impression that you don't do?
No. Hey, Phil, love the podcast. If possible, can you do a duet between Mr. Nezer and Mr. Lunt for the theme song? Sure, not at the same time. Not at the same time.
That would be problematic.
But yeah, they could take turns, and that could be kind of fun. So let's do that. Who starts first? Mr. Lunt, I think, starts first.
I think it's up to you. Isn't it?
Well, this is, I'm open for input. Hey, it's a podcast. What do you know?
Hey, it's a podcast, and we got video.
Hey, it's a podcast. So lend an ear.
The Phil Vischer podcast starts right here.
We'll talk to Sky.
Hi, Mr. Nezer, Mr. Lunt.
Mr. Lunt.
I was saying hi to both of
Mr.
them.
Nezer's ignoring you. He's not making eye contact with you. That was Mr. Lunt.
Sorry, Mr. Lunt.
And John Walton, too.
Hi to both of you.
Yeah, okay, thanks. 'Cause he's our guest here just for you.
Hey, it's a podcast, so lend an ear. The Phil Vischer podcast starts right here.
The Phil Vischer podcast starts right here. Okay. See, he was the one who sang the cheeseburger song and did
Yes.
the really dramatic finish. Yeah. Where we exposed his lack of eyes for the first time. I think that was the first time we ever took off Mr. Lunt's hat. He didn't have his hat on.
He had no eyes.
Had no eyes. He has eyebrows, and then they made wrinkles when he squinches up at the end. And he goes, "'Cause you're his cheeseburger." They made wrinkles, which was
Like
really,
he was straining.
Yeah, he was straining
Yeah.
because he was. It's not like he was.
It's funny because I've seen people with eyes but no eyebrows. Mm-hmm. But I haven't seen people with eyebrows without eyes.
Really?
Yeah.
Not even like Russians with really bushy eyebrows that cover up their eyes and they drink vodka and
No.
comrade.
That's not a stereotype, is it?
Yeah.
That's pretty much
it
Phil's
is.
whole career.
Ideal
It's
and
just
stereotype.
exploiting stereotypes.
We invited you here because you are the stereotypical Old Testament scholar.
Wow.
Rattling off Hebrew.
Not
here and
drinking
there.
vodka, though, at the moment.
Not
No.
drinking the vodka when we do the... No, what was... when were spirits first distilled? And were there distilled spirits in the ancient world?
Well, there are evil spirits and there are demon spirits. There's even the spirit of God. But no, distillation did not take place in the ancient world.
Okay, so they just had wine and beer? Did they have beer? Or
In
grog? Ale?
In most countries, they had beer. There's not yet a lot of evidence that Israel had beer, but people around them did, so they
But they
very
had
well.
wine galore.
They had wine, yeah. Mhm.
Did they have $3 Chuck?
I don't
That was
know.
$2 Chuck.
Didn't they raise the price?
Is it up to $3?
I don't know.
Yeah, depends what the shekel's worth on the market these
Right,
days.
yeah.
Okay, this is interesting. So someone else did a blog post naming us as one of their 5 favorite podcasts.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, I don't remember who it was. I don't have the link in front of me. But they were very complimentary of the podcast, and then they got to the end and said, if only we could get Phil to put down that ukulele.
I concur.
Yeah. Yeah.
I concur. Let's raise money to have Plinky Pete kidnapped.
That's just not nice. Phil.
but
That's, it's nice that you name us one of your 5 favorite
But I paid your
podcasts.
mom. That's why she said it.
Yeah.
John knows my mother. They were. Are you on the same floor?
Not anymore.
Oh, not anymore. Who got tired of whom?
I got elevated to the attic. Yeah.
Oh, you're in the attic
Yeah.
of the BGC now?
Yeah.
Interesting. But then, so in defense of Plinky Pete, that's the name of my ukulele, and the theme song, I got a letter about how Plinky Pete and the theme song saved someone's life.
Oh, come on. You making this up?
Okay, let me read it to you. Okay, this is from Kelly Shell Anderson. Kelly, you know who you are. I'm talking to you. Phil, your podcast intro music, theme song, was a lifesaver. 2 weeks ago, my husband and I got stuck out in the middle of nowhere on a bike trip thanks to a miscalculation of the distance. Somehow we thought it was 30 miles. Turns out it was 56 miles. For 9 hours, the last hour in the dark, we biked a gradual incline against the wind in 85-degree temperatures and ran out of water 20 miles before our destination with no towns nearby for help. Okay, are you holding that picture in your head?
I'm just trying to imagine where the ukulele is going to come into it.
What? It's not obvious?
It's somehow eluding me at the moment.
Okay, so they're nearly dying. This is a terrible situation.
Okay.
For the last 20 miles, I literally zoned out, head down, hearing in my head with each rotation of the pedal, each word and note of, hey, it's a podcast. What do you know? Hey, it's a podcast. And now there's video. Hey, it's a podcast. So lend an ear. The Phil Vischer podcast starts right here. Over and over and over, Plinky Pete strummed out a rhythm that kept my feet moving until we finally made it to our place to stay for the night.
Okay, let's back
And
up.
she's not done.
There's two ways of interpreting that, though, Phil.
What?
There's the positive way,
where Plinky Pete saved the day.
or this is a person on death's doorstep.
Yeah.
And
it was the angel of the Lord.
and they're
was
in this
Plinky
horrible situation, and the only thing that can make it worse and torture them more.
Pete. This got her through it. Yeah. Over and over and over, Plinky Pete strummed out a rhythm that kept my feet moving until we made it.
Like you're racing against a Grim Reaper who's on your heels.
You know, like the methodology that says, hey, I've got a headache, and somebody stomps on your foot, and you say, wow, why'd you stomp on my foot? Well, it made you forget your headache.
That's right.
Yeah,
We felt nearly dead and strangely in the mood for a Phil Vischer podcast before bedtime. So thank you, Phil, and thank you, Plinky Pete.
Have you read Dante's Inferno?
Kelly and Adrian, are there ukuleles in it?
Yes, there's a certain level of hell which is completely occupied by ukulele playing
Really?
demons. Yes,
Is that below or above the level occupied by French mimes?
it's very nearby. It's very close.
Some people think those two circles are related somehow.
So, if you are not a fan of the ukulele and or Plinky personally, keep in mind he's a lifesaver. There are two people that may not still be on this earth if it wasn't for Plinky Pete. Do you think that was an overstatement?
Whatever. If it makes you feel like
Sky is normally surly, but he's sick today.
I'm a little under the weather, if you can hear it in my voice.
His surly meter is up about 20%.
I think I've spent too much time on airplanes, and I finally got something.
But he's trying to let Plinky Pete keep him going.
Yeah, right. just you want me to strum while we go so you can sustain your...
Right.
Okay. I took a trip last week. Do you know where I went?
Yes, I do.
I don't know if we mentioned it last week on the podcast.
Where'd you go, Phil?
Thank you, John. You're more cooperative than Sky. I went to Portland State University to speak in the atheism class of my good friend and mortal enemy, according to our philosophical points of view, Dr. Peter Boghossian at Portland State University. He's the author of Manual for Creating Atheists, which we reviewed on the show, and then we got in touch with each other. And then I went and spoke at his atheism class.
He put you on exhibit.
He put me on.
This is what we are trying to work against.
I rattled the bars of my cage with my cup, my tin
With your
cup.
puppet rod?
No, it's a big class. It was a 300 level class. There were 120 students in there. He said primarily the kids in the class are either hardcore atheists who want to disprove religion or hardcore Christians or Mormons who want to learn about atheism so they can disprove atheism. So it's a lively bunch, and they're very, very willing to ask lots and lots of questions.
Mm-hmm.
And after it was over, Peter and I both agreed that the Q&A probably could have gone on for about 6 more hours because everybody had questions. But it was fun. It was fun. And I stayed at his house. He slept in his guest room, which he said many famous atheists have slept in that room.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's like the Lincoln bedroom of atheism, huh?
And I hung out with his kids, his 13-year-old son and his 8-year-old daughter. I hung out with them.
Are they VeggieTales fans by chance?
No.
Didn't think so.
They weren't really familiar with VeggieTales. His son wanted to ask me lots of questions. You know, his dad said, he doesn't meet many Christians, so he has a lot of questions for you. So it was kind of fun. Got to answer his questions about hell and the book of Job. He brought up Job. He says, what's that crazy story in the Bible about some some guy that God like kills his family and takes everything away. And you mean Job? Yeah. What's that all about? So we talked about that. It was actually a lot of fun. We had a good time. I'm hoping to get some feedback from what the students thought.
So the obvious question then, Phil,
Yeah.
is when do you invite Peter Boghossian to stay at your house?
When he actually has family in the Chicago
Does
area,
he?
so they would probably stay with them.
Oh.
Yeah, but he does want to get together.
We should have him live on the podcast
It
in person.
Yeah, we could. Yeah, if he's in the neighborhood, we could have him live in person. That would be fun. But it's there's some people in both communities, in the atheist community, that want every interaction to be a battle.
Right.
It's like you didn't take him down, you didn't and frankly there's some people, in the Christian community that want the same thing, that want every interaction to end with some kind of altar call, and I give my life to Jesus.
So that didn't happen in the class last week?
That did not happen. Neither happened. There were lots of interesting theological questions. I think the first question one of the students asked me was, so if you had the power that God has, would you have stopped the Holocaust? And you just like go, whoa, okay, that doesn't usually come up in Sunday school.
That's another way of asking the problem of evil.
Yes,
right.
Yes. And I said, so you're really asking a whole category of question that people have been wrestling with, since Augustine.
Or before.
No, he started it.
Really?
Yeah, I don't think anyone.
Made it up entirely. Yeah. So were there unexpected questions?
Unexpected. Well, one guy just flatly out of the blue just said, describe God. It's like, oh, wow, that's...
You said, read the Bible.
Yeah. And then you realize that's, unless you've really thought that through and prepared something, that's hard to do just completely off the cuff. And I'm sure you both could probably do it better than I did because, you went to seminary and you are seminary. But that was an interesting question. There were questions about a lot of the questions were ones you'd expect. The Bible's pro-slavery, it's anti-woman. What do you say about that? I made what I think was the mistake of in my explanation of why I believe the Christian narrative is the best explanation for the data I look at in my human experience, of mentioning friends that I've had who've experienced healing, some fairly profound events of healing, and I kind of knew this, but that's the whole category of faith healing is really an irritant to a lot in the new atheist community, because the assumption is that those incidents have all been disproven. We've looked into it. We've found out that Benny Hinn is a fraud and Peter Popoff is a fraud. So therefore, all faith healing claims are fraudulent and designed to make money off of poor people, off the innocent. So if you really want to get an atheist aggravated or righteously indignant, that's the best way to go.
Or unrighteously indignant.
Well, righteously in their own worldview.
Right, I know.
Yes. Everyone's righteousness
So you can't play the miracle card.
You can't really play the miracle card unless you want a kind of a dog pile on you. And so it was very clear pretty quickly that was in danger of kind of taking the whole conversation off track. So I just said, just one thing. I'm not I'm not banking anything on faith healing. Let's just go back to the... But then it was a good conversation. And what was fun is, even after it was over, some of the guys that were the most critical came up and said, thanks for coming, really appreciated it, enjoyed hearing you talk. So it was a positive interaction.
Well, good.
And it was actually a lot of fun. Yeah.
Good thing.
I'm really glad that you did that, and I think it's remarkable the relationship that's developed between you and Dr. Boghossian since.
Yeah, my brother, who's the dean of St. Thomas Law School in Minneapolis, emailed me an article, I think in the New York Times, about an atheist and a Christian apologist at Penn State or University of Pennsylvania, I think, who have become friends. And the atheist is actually an editor, so he offered to edit the apologist's new book on God.
I'm sure he did.
And they actually collaborated on editing a book together. And so the New York Times thought it was worth writing art. So I sent that to Peter Boghossian and said, look, there's an us at the University of Pennsylvania. And he thought that was fun. His dog, big black lab, before I left his house, his dog came over to me and laid down next to me and put his paw on my shoe.
Was he healed?
He didn't want, he didn't want me to leave.
Oh, because
He said, "Stay here. We're having such valuable conversations. Stay here." So anyway, it was fun. It was fun. His 13-year-old son said to me at one point, "My dad is really into atheism."
You think?
Really? We have so many atheists come to our house. And then he wanted to ask me questions about hell.
we talk so often about young adults who walk away from the faith having grown up in Christian homes or an evangelical home. I'd love to hear a story of a kid who grew up in a staunchly atheistic home becoming a person of faith.
Yeah.
Well, isn't that the Madeline Mary O'Hare's
Is that-
son became a committed Christian? My recollection is.
Oh, interesting.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
I wonder what her reaction was to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it tends not to be reported
Right.
a lot. Our friend Justin Brierley, had an interview, a debate on his unbelievable podcast between
It's unbelievable.
It's unbelievable. Justin Brierley, welcome along. Here we go. Hit it, guys. And then the Beatles play.
Right.
As opposed to a ukulele.
Yeah. Because it's British.
Not Hawaiian.
He had a debate between an American Christian who became an atheist and a French atheist who became a Christian.
Oh, I think I heard that
Which is
one.
kind of an
Yeah.
interesting, because most of the prominent atheists, at least in the U.S., a huge proportion of them started out as in fundamental traditions. They started out so as conservatives you could get, and then had a very strong repulsion.
Right.
If you're at the very end of the magnet pole and you reject it, you go flying faster than if you're in the middle. And those tend to be the ones that are the most often strident, and aggressive.
I did a debate in college once. It was sponsored by the Muslim student group, whatever. I was friends with them, and they wanted to do a debate between me and a Muslim who they were going to bring in. And it turns out my opponent, and I'm using air quotes for the debate, was an Irish woman. White Irish
Muslim Irish woman
who converted to Islam.
Oh,
and
that's
so they
interesting.
introduced us both.
Bet you didn't see that coming.
I did not see that coming. They introduced us both, but didn't identify who was the Christian and who was the Muslim. And so everyone assumed, of course, I was the Muslim, and she's the Christian. And she had come out of some Pentecostal background and reacted heavily to that. And so it was like whiplash for everybody in the audience. Go, what? Wait a minute.
Yeah.
The dark guy with the goatee at the time is the Christian?
And you used to wear a turban in college.
Yeah, well,
too.
Muslims don't wear turbans.
You used to wear a Muslim hat in the ball cap with.
Remember, he lives on stereotypes.
Yeah.
That's his thing. So, she's blonde hair, blue eyed, white.
Used to wear the full covering, and you were.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
it was one of
What
those.
did you wear in college?
Me?
Yeah.
Just a toga every day.
Okay, this just in, before we get to John and what we actually want to talk about, this just in from the Department of Questionable Evangelism Techniques. Telling people about Jesus, I think we would agree, is generally good, right?
It's what they
You with me?
tell them about Jesus.
You with me, John?
So far, it sounds irreproachable.
Telling people about Jesus after pulling them over with your police car for a traffic stop?
Oh, yeah.
Maybe not as good. Indiana State Trooper Brian Hamilton pulled over 60-year-old Ellen Bogan for some sort of supposed traffic violation in August, asked for her license and registration, and whether she had accepted Jesus as her savior. It's completely out of line, and it just took me aback, Bogan told the Indianapolis Star newspaper.
Wait. Can you stop for a second?
Yes.
Did he just come right out and say that? Like,
Trooper Hamilton prolonged the traffic stop by asking Miss Bogan, among other things, if she had accepted Jesus Christ as her Savior, and then presented her with a pamphlet from the First Baptist Church in Cambridge that informed the reader that he or she is a sinner, listed God's plan of salvation, noting that the person must realize that the Lord Jesus Christ paid the penalty for your sins, and advertised a radio broadcast entitled Policing for Jesus Ministries.
but he's not going to pay the penalty for her speeding ticket, right? No. Is that's her responsibility?
Yeah.
So-
And hell's a lot worse than a speeding ticket, just saying.
Just saying, and he's an OT scholar.
I've been
so
pulled over in Indiana before. He
should
didn't share the
know.
gospel with me.
Yeah.
Yeah, so conservative activist Micah Clark says, what's wrong with that? He's of the American Family Association of
course.
Indiana.
Yeah.
In fact, Clark says the lawsuit may be a violation of the police officer's First Amendment rights.
No.
He says, I have people pass out religious material all the time. Mormons come to my door all the time, and it doesn't offend me. I don't think that a police officer is prohibited from doing something like that. But constitutional scholar Jennifer Droback of Indiana University says the problem is that police officers represent the government, and the Constitution says that the government can't stick its fingers into anyone's religion or lack thereof.
It's an abuse of power, of authority.
Captive audience.
To pull someone over and with your lights on, flashing, ask them if they've given their lives over to Jesus.
Will this affect whether I get a ticket or just a warning? Or
Yeah. So do we feel like we can safely file that in the category of probably not a good idea?
Probably not a good idea.
Okay. Is there a better way for a police officer to share his faith?
Probably off duty would be my guess.
This is something that one of Peter Boghossian's friends and another fairly very staunch atheist, and I think I mentioned before, he's a mathematician. He wrote a piece on the concept of infinity and why infinity would help people like Westboro Baptist Church, Fred Phelps, justify their beliefs and their behavior. And it was an interesting argument because he says, okay, stick with me.
I'm trying.
I think I'm losing you.
I have a head cold. You got to work hard.
He says, okay, eternity is infinite.
Yeah, that's pretty much what that means.
Yes. So an infinity in hell is infinitely bad.
Yeah.
Okay, eternity or infinity in heaven is infinitely good. So any earthly discomfort or comfort, when compared proportionately to infinite good or infinite bad, is irrelevant. Mm-hmm. So, and he said this came from actually an interview that Russell Brand did with two members of the Westboro Baptist Church, where they were trying to explain why they were actually showing people love by protesting it.
I heard a very similar argument from John Piper.
You did?
Oh, yeah. When he was at...
Does he protest at the funerals
No,
of homosexuals?
he spoke at the Lausanne Congress for World Evangelization in 2010 in Cape Town, South Africa.
Yeah.
And I was there in attendance. And he used a similar argument to say that the things we do in this world, and I'm not going to get it quite right, to alleviate temporal suffering is a good thing, but to alleviate infinite suffering, meaning hell, is a better thing. Therefore, we should be giving more of our time and energy and efforts to salvation rather than say, healing the sick.
Couldn't you also say that infinite benefit is, makes temporal benefit turn into nothing proportionately, so harming people temporally for the potential of saving someone eternally, can't you justify that?
Well, that was the same justification given for all kinds of colonial atrocities, including the massacre of native peoples in the Western Hemisphere and the Crusades and all that kind of stuff.
We massacred them to bring them to heaven.
Well, yeah, there was a sense that they convert or kill them.
Oh.
Because, hey, they're going to go to hell anyway.
So what's the difference?
Yeah.
John?
Yes. Are you looking for a vote?
How would you counter someone saying it's okay to treat people horribly in the name of Christ if there's a chance that it could lead to salvation and then eternal blessing for them?
Well, we don't know what any given course of action will lead to for them here, and so I think we have to be responsible for our actions here moment by moment, because that's what we know, and we're called on to act in particular ways as Christians. We're not called on to get everybody into heaven by hook or by crook. We're called on to be in relationship with God and call other people to relationship with God. You can look up hook and crook in your concordance, but I don't think you're going to find it.
It comes from a very medieval understanding.
As rod and staff, though? My rod and staff will guide you into heaven?
And my hook and crook will... No, okay.
Yeah, okay. No?
It's a very flawed argument.
Really? So you don't think the Westboro Baptist Church is onto something?
No, I don't.
You don't want to go on record saying that?
I will not go on record saying that.
Okay. The reason we have John here is he was at the Okoboji Lakes Bible and Missionary Conference this summer. Ding! Sky and I were also there. Sky taught a class. What did you teach?
10 Commandments for Interpreting Scripture.
Oh, that's right. I attended it. I
Yes, you
should
did.
remember
Yeah,
that.
it worked really
My
well,
wife did
obviously.
also. She went to his instead of mine.
Really?
Just saying.
Well, my wife always goes to someone else's class. when
Sure.
it's- Yeah,
I mean, she knows what I say.
that's right.
And John taught a class, probably the most exciting class there,
Clearly.
wouldn't you think? On the book of Job.
The book of Job.
The book of Job. And the book of
It's a great book.
It's a crazy book.
Well,
It's
it's
a loony book.
It's brilliant.
And John actually knows something about the book of Job because he actually wrote the application commentary, the NIV application commentary on the book of Job.
Are we going to put this up?
Yeah, give me that. Give me that. Ding your bell. Ding your bell. Sickly one. See? The NIV application commentary. Oh, look. John Walton. Well, wait a minute. Is this just the book of Job? This whole thing?
Yeah.
This whole thing is just the book
Have
of
you never seen a commentary before?
But how many verses is the book of Job?
It's 42 chapters.
42 chapters.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's not short, I guess.
No.
This is a 450-page commentary. Mm-hmm. You wrote 450 pages.
Wow.
Yeah, I know.
I'm
How
glad
do
I
you
didn't
feel
know
about that
I'm
now?
glad I didn't know that when I started.
That's 10 pages per chapter, right? Roughly.
Yeah, think of all the
Yes.
things I left out.
I'd rather not, if it's okay with you. So most people, like me growing up, I just take the book of Job and just kind of, for the most part, ignore it, except for the very vaguest of spiritual lesson that, the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away, or, don't complain. That was my spiritual lesson from the book of Job.
Wow. Deep.
You
Yeah.
think you got it bad. That's the spiritual lesson of Job. You think you got it bad. Look at this guy.
Yeah, quit your complaining.
Yeah, quit your complaining.
Yeah.
That was the kind of Protestant work ethic version of the book of Job. Is the book of Job about Job?
No.
I think the same person titled that book that worked on mine at the publishers.
They called your book Sky?
No, because publishers always
With?
mistitle. No, with is actually
With is
fairly
not
accurate.
about with?
It's about with, but
Okay.
but some of my others.
Okay. Okay.
It's-
What is it? What is the book of Job for?
Here we go. He's getting himself
I'm ready now.
He's putting his forearms on the table. He's getting close to the mic.
He's
hear it.
moving in. He's moving in. And don't just start on page 1 because we don't have that kind of time. What is the book of Job for?
Let me give you 3 categories that'll help.
Okay. 3
First
categories
of
of
all,
books of Job?
No.
Oh.
First of all, we very easily think that it's a book about Job. But
Yes.
it's
He's
more
being tested. It's the testing of
more a
Job.
book about God.
Well, of course, yeah, because
Yeah.
it's part of the Bible, which is a book about
but
God.
the extension is that it's not Job who's on trial. It's God's policies that are on trial. And Job is not
Just like Barack Obama.
Is this a good time to say what you're talking about, Willis? What you talking about, Willis?
So God's policies are on trial in the book
Yes.
of Job.
Because Job is not a defendant. He thinks he is, but he's not. His friends think he is, but he's not. Job is not a plaintiff, although he tries to take the role of plaintiff, dragging God into court
Yeah.
and suing him for damages. Okay? But Job is neither defendant nor plaintiff. Job is actually, unbeknownst to him, star witness for the defense.
Okay, let's back up for a second. In case
Okay.
we
Then they won't be able to see me on the screen.
In case we have philosophers, as they're now being called, the Phil Vischer audience here.
Philosopher.
Yeah, I didn't
Yeah,
make
yeah,
that
yeah.
up. Don't look at me.
If we have listeners who are not familiar with the basic story in the book
Yeah,
of Job,
okay, let me tell the basic
yeah, let's
story.
do the basic story.
Basic story of the book of Job. Heaven. We're in heaven. God is in heaven. Satan shows up in heaven.
No, he doesn't.
Accuses God of something, of Job, of I don't know
You see what Dr. Walton's doing? He's
And
putting
then
he's doing a face palm.
bad stuff happens. So they take everything away from Job. He's miserable. And then he gets it back.
Okay, that was bad. Let's start over. There's a scene in heaven
Yes.
where
I
God
got
is
that
there,
part right.
and the accuser shows up.
Yes.
Ha-Satan, not necessarily Satan.
Satan. Wait a minute. Explain yourself.
Dr. Walton.
You know,
Is it Satan?
Most people think that they don't know Hebrew, but
Yeah.
the Hebrew word that they know is Satan, because that is a Hebrew word. It's a Hebrew noun. It's a Hebrew verb. It's used in a variety of different categories, but in Hebrew, it is not a personal name. It describes an action to be an opponent or an adversary to someone. It identifies certain individuals as adversaries, like kings who attack King Solomon's realm.
We're called Satans?
Or even, yes.
And America called the Great Satan?
Yeah, of course, that too. I don't know which verse that is, though. and even the angel of the Lord who blocks Balaam's path is called a Satan, an adversary. So there's no reason to think that just because we have this Hebrew noun attached to this individual in the book of Job, that it is the Satan we know in the New Testament.
Then why do we all think it is?
Because translations always put it there with a big capital S.
Why do they do that? Unless it's true.
Because if they change too many things, people won't buy the translation, or there's just
when
a lot
was
of...
When was it first capitalized in that sense? Was it like a King James thing, or does it go back to Latin translations that made it seem
That's
pronoun-ish?
difficult to tell. Personal
noun-ish?
Yeah. I haven't traced the whole history of translation to know that.
Okay.
Satan becomes a personal name probably in the intertestamental period, maybe around 2nd century. So by the time you get to New Testament, it's one of the names that can be used for the devil.
Okay.
But
is there a word for the devil in Hebrew?
No.
No.
Their character doesn't exist in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
Great.
So-
How many times today am I going to say what you talking about, Willis? Because
Probably a lot.
Okay.
So, how would you translate it?
I tend to translate it the challenger. Adversary is another possibility, though adversary already puts them in a more negative class.
So you think Satan is put in too negative a class?
Yeah, so I'm
In the translation of the book of Job.
the devil's advocate. No.
Okay, so going back to the narrative
Wormwood.
then, there's a scene in heaven. This challenger shows up on the scene and says to God, people only worship you because you're good to them.
Well, that God says, what a great guy Job is. Look at him. What a wonderful example of righteousness and uprightness, fearing God, turning away from evil. Wow.
So God's
Look
the
at
one
that.
who puts a spotlight on
Yeah,
Job
God
first,
starts.
right? So
And
then the challenger says,
Then the challenger says, well, just hold on a minute. Does Job really serve God for nothing? You've made it really worth his while. I mean, look at
He's got
the
stuff.
guy. I mean, he is equipped, and so you've made it so that who wouldn't be righteous if you paid him off like that? But the question is Job righteous because righteousness is the right thing to do? Or is Job righteous because he's figured out the system?
Right,
he
'cause
knows
it's
he gets
profitable.
paid for it. Now, that is a legitimate question.
and it's a profound question throughout the scriptures, and even into the New Testament, you see this comes up again and again in Jesus' ministry.
Well, even when
Well, there's the assumption from the Pharisees and from other leaders that the people who are rich and blessed material in the world are righteous because they've
Right.
obeyed God, and
the
those who
connection
are
between blessing and righteousness.
exactly.
and that somebody born blind, either he or his parents must have sinned.
Right.
John chapter 9.
Right.
And you go all the way back to Abraham on the front end, where God asks Abraham to sacrifice Isaac, which is basically the same thing. Do you fear God for nothing? Or are you being faithful and obedient because I've offered you all kinds of goodies?
Right.
So
Right.
it's still a question of what we call disinterested righteousness.
This is the core issue I wrestle with in my book With, which is all about, are we seeking after God for union with God, or do we just want his blessings, the effects
Right.
of following
Exactly.
God?
Right. So this is a test.
that was for With.
Belated.
Yeah.
This is a test of God's policy
Right.
of
Blessing righteous people.
Okay.
We call it the retribution principle. Righteous people prosper, wicked people suffer.
Okay.
Retribution principle. Problem in the book of Job is that they believed that was the answer to how the world worked.
Yeah.
And of course, in Job's life, that was looking like it was working just fine. He was blessed abundantly. He was righteous in every way that people could identify. And so there it is, the system at work. And so when the challenger says, well, if you take it all away, is he still going to be righteous, or is he going to curse you to your face? So in that sense, Job becomes the star witness for the defense. That is, are God's policies appropriate, which would be demonstrated if Job retains his righteousness, even though he loses all of the benefits.
Right.
So in that sense, we're not trying to find out whether Job is righteous. He was declared that from the beginning. He's declared that at the end. We're trying to figure out if his righteousness is motivated by who God is or because of what he gets.
In other words, is God's treatment of Job up to this point in his life, has that produced righteousness?
Sure. And
through bribery.
And the challenger is saying, you've created mercenaries. People are being righteous just because they stand to gain.
And that's frankly what I see everywhere I go.
Right.
Both in well, it is to a degree, but you in the U.S. that's true, and I travel overseas and I see people of other faiths. A lot of religious engagement is motivated by the sense that I'm going to be rewarded for this.
Right.
I'm going to make the sacrifices. I'm going to do the prayers, whatever. Sorry, I just spit. That could be tainted. Because then I'm going to get materially blessed.
And Christians are certainly not immune to that kind of thinking. Yeah, so
it's very superstitious.
Sure. And so in that sense, it's suffering that helps us to discover whether our righteousness is disinterested or whether our righteousness is very much motivated by what we stand to gain from it. That's why, in the end, the book is more about righteousness than it is about suffering. It's not going to give you an explanation for suffering. Lots of people read it thinking that's what it's for, and they get to the end and they're disappointed.
I remember I didn't have any background with the Book of Job before I read it, I think as a college student. And I was reading it slowly, chapter by chapter, and I totally fell for it, hook, line, and sinker. And I'm underlining, this is great wisdom coming from these friends who are telling them all this. And then you get to the end, and it's this whole, gotcha.
They're wrong. So people think it's a book about suffering.
Was it the first surprise ending in history, in
Maybe,
literature?
I don't know. Since we don't know when it was written,
does
that's
Gilgamesh
difficult.
have a surprise ending?
Yeah, that's where M. Night Shyamalan got all of his inspiration was from the Book of Job.
So, okay, and I've also heard, because I had to do at least a little explanation of the Book of Job in what's in the Bible, and I actually sent you an email and said, help me out here, give me something to read. I'm really curious about
Not
this.
a 450-page commentary.
I'm not going to go that far, because I was going to talk about it for about 5 minutes for kids, and no.
Slacker.
Yeah, and one of the most kind of eye-opening things that I discovered in doing my own research and talking to you was just the notion that the bulk of the Book of Job is a poem.
Right. Just the beginning and the end that are prose.
Yeah, it's all the dialogue is
narrative.
is poetry, because it's such a bizarre story. That you try to figure out. Wait a minute. So do scenes like this still play out today? Is God still being accused by accusers and/or Satan? And so the fact that it's poetry, what does that tell us about the historicity of the details?
Well, I don't know that it says much about historicity, but it says a lot about literary type. What is this? It's wisdom literature, and it is a literary construct. People don't talk like that.
Right.
Certainly not extemporaneously. They don't talk like that.
Not even God.
No, not even God.
But he could if he wanted
could if he
to.
wanted.
He could talk extemporaneously in perfectly formed Hebrew poetry.
Exactly. But the friends,
or acrostics.
Wow, that would be good. But people don't talk that way. And furthermore, even if they did, there's no stenographer present to take it all down.
Right.
These speeches are a literary construct. They have been framed and put together in order to make their literary points and philosophical and theological points. So in that sense, it tells you a lot about what kind of literature it is, a wisdom literature that's been constructed in order to open up the philosophical questions, and that tells you something about it. Now, is this based still on the story of a real person in real time in a real past? I tend to think so, although it would be valid even if it weren't. But I tend to think so. I don't see a whole lot of making up of characters in the ancient world, in ancient literature. Certainly there are legendary things that develop about characters, but it's difficult to identify a character which is intentionally and identifiably fictional.
Right. And the fact that Job is mentioned in the New Testament as if he is historical, is that typically when a character is mentioned in the New Testament as historical, does that settle the issue in your mind?
Not necessarily, because they can make reference to a literary character.
Okay.
At least how it's developed literarily. Remember, for instance, that Melchizedek is a historical character.
Yeah.
But when the book of Hebrews deals with him, they're dealing with not only the historical character, but they're also dealing with the intertestamental picture of him that developed, that is literary in nature.
Which is not in the book of Genesis.
Which is not in the book of Genesis or in the book of Psalms. And by that time, they're portraying him as an archangel who's involved in bringing salvation for the people of Israel. I mean, there's all kinds of things connected to Melchizedek in the intertestamental period. And the author of Hebrews is bouncing off all of that. So there are aspects of a literary character.
Okay. So when you taught the book of Job for an entire week to a bunch of Midwestern, just mom and dad Christians, what were the 2 or 3 things that surprised them the most, that got the most, lifted eyebrows in that class?
Well, I mean, the idea that we're focusing on God, that it's really not there to learn about Job, it's not there to learn about suffering, it's not there to give us answers about suffering, that it's there to help us evaluate our own righteousness. That is our righteousness a disinterested righteousness? That's the question the book has to ask.
Is it motivated by personal gain?
Exactly.
Or is
and
what's the alternative to being motivated by personal gain for your righteousness?
To be motivated purely by who God is and the person of God. But then connected to that, the idea that the book is really not going to defend God's justice. God does not defend his justice when he appears on the scene. He rather speaks of his wisdom. And understand that it's not a book that's going to give you some way of understanding, why this happened to me and why this happens in the world and why my loved one is suffering. So it's not going to give you those answers, and it's not there to explain God's behavior. God does not explain his behavior.
That's one of the more kind of whiplash things that happens in the book, is for so many chapters you have these practical explanations from Job's friends about why he's suffering. And it's all the stuff we've heard all of our lives usually. Well, you're suffering because you've disobeyed God, or you're suffering because whatever. And it goes chapter after chapter after chapter, and then Job finally cries out and says, I want an answer. I want to know why this has happened to me. And we all have those moments. And when God finally shows up, he doesn't give an answer.
No, not doing that.
I'm God, you're not. It's kind of
it's a little more than that.
It's more than that, but he doesn't satisfy with the answer. And I think that's what so many times in religious communities we want to say we've got the answers. We know why the world works the way it does.
We want to be able to predict blessing and curse. We want
control.
Exactly.
Some sense of control. And the basic answer the book gives is, don't try to sort out how God's justice works in this world. There's no formula, retribution principle, or any other formula to figure out how God works in the world. I'm God and you are not, so here's my qualification. So trust me. I'm wise. I love you. Trust me. I've got it covered.
Okay.
But that's the big hurdle of faith, though. It's despite all of the craziness you see in this world that doesn't seem to make sense.
So
trust me anyway.
A windstorm has just destroyed my house and killed all my children, and the message is, trust me.
Don't make decisions about what God is like because of the experiences that you've had. See, the book wants us to know how to think about God when things are going haywire. Not how to explain everything, and not how to justify the behavior, not how to get an answer to why. One of the things that I think even Jesus is trying to draw out in John 9 with the man born blind, when the disciples say, okay, was it this man or his parents? And Jesus said, neither one. And what he does is he turns their attention away from the past and the cause, the reason why this man is born blind, and he turns their attention to the future and says, look at the purpose. This man is going to be healed right now, and there is purpose in that. That doesn't explain why he's blind, but it talks about what for. Where's it going from here? And so in that sense, one of the powerful messages of the book of Job is stop asking why. Okay? Start thinking about, where do I go from here? My life's a mess. How do I serve God in a mess? And you don't do that by throwing God out the window and just casting away your faith. You do it by trusting him, by believing that he is wise, and by moving ahead.
Which gets back to the question you were asked in Peter Boghossian's class about if you had the powers that God has, would you have stopped the Holocaust? Another way of asking, why does God allow evil and bad things to happen?
Right.
And the overwhelming message of the whole Bible is not an explanation as to why the world is broken, as much as it is, here's what God is doing to remedy it. And our lives as well as a part of that. And
Right.
But it's a hard thing to do. I mean, we want the explanation, we want that sense of control.
So is it erroneous to think if something bad happens to me, it may be because of some kind of barroom bet up in heaven that just happened between God and Satan?
Yes, I think that is entirely erroneous. But this gets into something fairly controversial with regard to how we think about the book. In the end, as I thought about it and wrote in the commentary, I was asking those kinds of questions. After all, if the book is revealing God, does it reveal a God who works this way? But beyond revealing God, which it does, but beyond revealing God, we also have to recognize that as wisdom literature, it qualifies best as what's known as a thought experiment. That is, it says, imagine a scene like this, with God in heaven and the challenger coming and the scenario unfolding. Imagine this kind of scene. I don't think it's trying to tell you this is what happened either then or what happens every time. But imagine that scenario, because what the book's going to do is it's going to create a whole series of extreme situations. Job's righteousness is extreme, the best you can imagine. His fall is as far as you can imagine it to go. The extreme of God's actions in setting this up. Even God is an extreme character, even in the ways that he doesn't give Job any satisfaction or answers all the way through the book till you get to the end. Everything is pulled to the outsides, because if you don't do that, the philosophical conversation inside can't happen. Because anytime you can qualify Job's righteousness or qualify his fall or qualify, anytime you can mitigate those, then the philosophical question is going to center on that mitigation.
It's an exaggerated scenario to prove a theological point with clarity.
To clear the boards inside.
Correct to say, are there other examples of that in the Bible? And I'm thinking of, like, the one that comes to mind would be Lazarus and the rich man. The
Sometimes parables do that. Parables do have a way to do that and to introduce surprising elements into a common scene.
Right, and then we can get into trouble when we look for things to pull out of them. Oh, so you can talk from hell to heaven.
Yeah,
you can request a glass of water.
Or God does make you pound on the door and scream for his help before he actually listens. We don't follow those that way. And so, again, I'm not saying Job is a parable, but I'm saying it operates as a thought experiment, and some of the parables do that also.
Okay. Is there anything else in the Bible? Well, what's the closest thing to Job? Because it just seems very unique.
Yeah. Now, as you know, you can't be very unique. You either are or you aren't unique, but...
I am extraordinarily unique. I'm a level 7 unique. Thank you for noticing.
Having said that...
Seems fairly unique. Seems largely unique. I don't know.
It's more unique than something
You're either a eunuch or you're not. You can't be very unique.
Okay.
Look it up, kids. Look it up.
I'm not going to touch that.
So...
Yeah, what's similar? Are there any other narrative stories in the wisdom literature?
No.
Okay, so it's unique right there.
It is, yes. Yes.
And I think that's why we often think of it. We just assume it's in the historicals, because it's a guy and stuff happened.
But there isn't another historical book in the Bible that's almost entirely poetry.
I know. Well, if you don't notice that, because it doesn't rhyme.
Well,
Sky.
yeah, but
I don't know if you noticed, Sky. It doesn't rhyme.
Well, it's also not in Hebrew in most of our translations. But if you look,
not even in the King James. I checked.
Most English translations of the Bible, when there's poetry, there's stanzas. It's not paragraphs.
But here's one of the other things that shows that the book is kind of everything in the extreme. Job, of course, is introduced as a non-Israelite. He's from the land of Uz, which is not in Israel. It's either in Edom or Aram. We're not exactly sure, but it's not Israel.
Okay.
So he's
You pronounce
not,
it Uz?
Uz, yeah.
Uz.
Uz.
It's like Oz.
Not Uz. No, Uz.
No Yellow Brick Roads.
Yeah.
Emerald
So he's not an Israelite. He has no Torah, none of the law, none of the covenant. All of that's out. He doesn't even refer to God as Yahweh. The prologue and epilogue do, but Job.
Has he ever had a
Job
policeman
doesn't.
pull him over and ask him if he knows about Jesus Christ?
But even ask him if he knows about Yahweh, he wouldn't.
He only refers to God as El,
El, Eloah, El Shaddai, Elohim,
but
not Yahweh.
The generic name for God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Interesting.
but even though he is then portrayed as non-Israelite, his thinking is entirely Israelite. That is, when he gets, for instance, when he gets to his oath in chapter 31, he swears that he has never lifted up his hands to the sun or moon. That's only an Israelite statement. Anybody else in the ancient world, they do that all the time, and they're proud of it. It's only in an Israelite thinking that you would say, I don't do that.
Right. So he's talking like an Israelite in a pre-Israelite world.
He never looks to ritual to solve his problems. And, of course, in the rest of the ancient world, ritual is the typical way you approach God.
So it's clearly a book written by Israelites for Israelites about Israelite dilemmas of philosophy and theology.
But
using a pre-Israelite
But it clears
character.
out, right? It clears out all the Torah covenant stuff to make room for that conversation.
That's rich. Okay, we're almost out of time. For our listeners, what's really the one key takeaway from the book of Job? If they read all 450 pages of the NIV application commentary by John H. Walton on the book of Job, available where fine Christian books are sold.
Well, now you're asking him to give the summary so no one has to buy it.
No, go buy it anyway because you get a royalty, right? Do you get a royalty? You get like a nickel?
Yeah.
You get a nickel?
Extra topping on the pizza.
For a day-to-day application.
That's not disinterested righteousness right there.
I mean, advertising? Is advertising? Okay. What's the opposite of disinterested righteousness?
Interested righteousness.
Really? There's not a better name for it than that? Compromised righteousness?
Self-focused.
Self-righteous. Self-righteous? No, that's not it. What of all the stuff we've talked about, what do you think is the most impactful takeaway for just the average reader of the Bible?
Don't try to reduce it all to a system, to say, when this happens, then it's because God's doing this or that or the other thing. It's far more complex than that.
You've just made every other book at the Christian bookstore irrelevant with that statement.
Oh, you just park your cynicism over there, pal. You've got books at Christian bookstores.
Yeah, but they don't do that.
I've got books at Christian bookstores. What do you say?
All right, fine. Ours don't do that.
Okay.
So, don't try to reduce it to a system. Trust God and His wisdom. Don't try to get answers or explanations for suffering of the past. Look to the future. Serve God from where you are, and trust His wisdom. If you really believe, this is from the Shack. If you really believe that He loves you.
Wow, hold on. What happened?
I think we just jumped the shark.
If you really believe that He loves you, you would trust Him.
That's in the Shack.
That's in the Shack.
Yeah, and that's actually very true.
That's biblical.
It's very biblical. Which is why Christ
Do you know
came
in the
to
movie
reveal.
version it would appear that Oprah Winfrey is going to play God the Father?
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
How do you feel about that?
Wow.
Yeah, you're going to withhold comment?
He did say, wow.
Yeah, wow.
That's going to be on the poster. Dr. John Walton, Old Testament professor. Wow.
Wow. Have you seen the new Left Behind movie with Nicolas Cage?
No.
It's not getting good reviews.
It's more like, ow.
Only because there's not room for the first W because of all the plane crashes on the poster.
I thought I was the first W. Okay.
Okay. Hey, folks. I know you're hating the thought that your life is run by Satan. If he is standing in heaven making deals with God, you say it's in the Bible, but it seems pretty odd. So John Walton is here to clear the thought from you that seems kind of queer, because it's not a parable, but somewhat parabolic.
When's he going to rhyme that with? I don't know.
And if you follow Jesus, he will cleanse your hair follicles. So with righteousness that isn't self-interested, and read Sky's book with, because he's interested in hopefully getting a little nickel as a royalty, but that's not what it's about.
Suffering.
As you can see, because suffering is not about what you've done or have not done, right?
I think people are crying out to God for answers right now.
Right. If that song confused you, just rewind to John's summary and go with that instead. Okay, thanks for coming, everybody. See you next week.
Bye.